They called us clumsy. So we sent the man who never misses. The words hit like a railgun shot through silence, but the room was still laughing. Somewhere in the depths of the Intergalactic Council chamber, a hologram looped for the 5th time, showing a human space engineer slipping on a zero-gravity banana peel during an EVA drill. One delegate nearly choked on his own tentacle from laughing too hard. Another species, the Threlks, who didn't even possess mouths, somehow still emitted a wheezing chuckle that fogged their breathing glass. On the central dais stood Councillor Quarn of the Jelvar Dominion, his bony fingers outstretched toward the screen. Primitive, he said. Unstable. Incapable of high-function combat scenarios. The footage shifted to grainy images of Earth soldiers missing target dummies during training, a goat running across a parade field, and a human general saluting with a coffee cup in hand. The chamber roared. And in the shadows of the gallery, Ambassador Amora Vale of Earth sat silent, arms folded, one brow raised. She didn't smile. She didn't interrupt. She waited. Because Earth had waited long enough. Quarn finally turned toward the assembly, tail twitching like a smug metronome. He declared that the upcoming planetary war games, an annual elite sharpshooter competition, would be closed to Earth, effective immediately. When a diplomatic aide asked why, he didn't even hesitate. You don't send clowns to an assassination contest, he said with a sneer. Unless the circus has collapsed. The chamber giggled again. Even the translator orbs hiccuped from overuse. It wasn't the insult that stung Amora. It was the ignorance. When the meeting ended, she stood up slowly, smoothed the front of her dark blazer, and walked toward Quarn with the pace of a loaded gun. Counselor, she said with a quiet chill, you've mistaken our silence for compliance. That was your first mistake. He didn't respond. He was too busy trying to contain his smugness, which, like a poorly capped reactor, was clearly about to explode. And your second, she continued, was assuming we'd send a team. He raised an eyebrow, curious now. We only need one. Back on Earth, a signal bounced off a buried satellite dish in a snow-covered valley that hadn't seen government use in decades. Deep in a mountainside facility that didn't officially exist, a mechanical door groaned open for the first time in 30 years. Inside, thick frost cracked off walls. A single folder lay on a steel desk, Operation Ghost. A retinal scanner flickered to life. A thumbprint was pressed. The file opened. It held only one page. No name, no bio. Just a call sign, Ghost. Below that, a single sentence, deploy upon insult. Lance Gage was chopping wood when the signal arrived. He lived alone in the Alaska Range, 2 valleys past where satellite coverage gave up and 3 days from the nearest road. His cabin was a Spartan fortress of habit, coffee tin on the same shelf for years, rifle oil stored alphabetically beside books on wind physics and long-range targeting. He didn't need to read the signal. He just heard the tone. Same one it always used. He stood still for a full minute, then wiped his hands, walked inside, and opened a chest he hadn't touched in a decade. Inside was a rifle older than most council members, wrapped in oilcloth and reverence. Beside it, a folded ghillie suit and a battered notebook. He placed each item on the table with slow care, then brewed a fresh cup of coffee. Not because he needed it, but because war deserved ceremony. The shuttle they sent wasn't labeled. It didn't land near a city. It touched down in a frozen basin where no satellites tracked entry. Gage stepped on board carrying one small duffel. Inside it, only essentials, his rifle, the notebook, and a worn photo of a unit from long ago. No medals. No names. Just faces. Men and women who didn't need applause because they never missed. As the ship broke atmosphere and aligned for slip space, Gage looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, they were laughing. Calling Earth a joke. He didn't care. That's what made the job easy. Meanwhile, the Galactic Arena on Veltraxis 9 was being prepped for the war games. Towering cliffs of obsidian. Ice fields with shifting magnetic poles. Thin oxygen, enough to confuse most species. Designed to test reflex, tech, and teamwork. Teams from across the galaxy arrived in ornate crafts. The Vextrians with adaptive camo suits that changed texture based on terrain. The Jelvar with hive mind drones that shared vision. The Morix with integrated spine rifles. Every team had 6 members minimum. Each had undergone decades of genetic enhancement, neural fusion, or combat evolution. Gage was the only solo entry. The council didn't even assign him barracks. They figured he wouldn't last the first hour. He didn't ask for lodging. He simply took his gear, nodded once to the logistics officer, and disappeared into the ridgelines. By sundown, he was gone. Not gone as in invisible. Gone as in non-existent to every motion tracker, drone feed, or heat sensor scanning the field. Some assumed he quit. A few mocked the primitive ghost. Others just forgot he was even there. Until the first nightfall, when the skies cracked open with the sound of a rail drone exploding mid-flight. The wreckage fell exactly 8 seconds before a second detonation vaporized a Vextrian forward sensor tower. Both incidents happened outside visible range of any other competitor. No known trace. No heat signature. No sound. Councillor Quorn, watching from the orbital command deck, leaned forward slightly. His brow furrowed. "Who took the shot?" asked a Marnakian technician. There was silence. No one knew. No one saw. And that's when someone muttered, not in fear, but with quiet, growing disbelief, "Wait, wasn't there a human?" In the snow, high above the valley, Gage lay motionless beneath a camo net, wind biting at his beard. He adjusted a dial on the rifle, scribbled one note in the margin of his notebook, and circled a word twice. The word was begin. Because the laughter was over. And the ghost had arrived. By dawn, the battlefield was crawling with life, but the air above the obsidian ridges remained still, heavy, and far too quiet. Teams marched through the broken valleys of Veltraxis 9 like apex predators on a trophy hunt, their boots crunching over ice-laid rock, scanning every ridge and every corner with advanced sensors. The Lurkin Empire squad, encased in biomech suits that pulsed with green veins of plasma, moved in formation along the south flank. Their lead scout activated a thermal sweep, sweeping his lens over the terrain. It showed only cold wind and jagged stone. No threats. No movement. No signs of life. But still, he felt something. That feeling every soldier learns to trust before tech ever catches up. The back of the neck tension. The crawling sense that you're being watched not by a beast, but by something waiting for you to blink first. He paused. The others mocked him, called him jumpy. He turned back to scanning, irritated at himself. He missed the glint. He missed the single half-second shimmer high up in the mountain range. But the man lying there didn't miss anything. Lance Gage blinked once through the scope, adjusted for wind deflection, and exhaled. His heart rate barely flickered. He did not speak. He did not move. The shot cracked through the silence like a whisper wrapped in thunder. A second later, the Lurkin scout dropped forward, face first into the snow, his HUD scrambling and sparking with a sizzling hole clean through his neural helmet. The other 5 spun toward the sound too late. They saw nothing. Only silence stared back. Up in the orbital command station, Councillor Quorn watched the monitor feed jump. One red dot disappeared from the Lurkin team's biometric field. A tech officer muttered something about an anomaly. Another began checking the footage. They found no projectile trail. No audio spike. No heat flash. Just a dead man and a blank void where the bullet should have been. Quorn tapped his clawed fingers on the edge of his chair. Satellite feed. Thermal lock. Full spectrum, he ordered. The monitors responded with overlapping visual data, revealing the entire field in ultraviolet, infrared, and quantum displacement mapping. Nothing. Not even a trace. He turned slowly to his aide. Where is the human? The aide gulped and scrolled through the player registry. The human's tracker pinged only once when he arrived. No movement since. No signal. No heat. Not even a life sign. The device showed his coordinates static near the upper ridgeline, unmoved for 22 hours. The aide whispered, "If that tracker's right, he hasn't even shifted his body weight." Elsewhere on the field, the Vextrian team took notice. Their squad leader, a sleek, silver-armored creature named Kesh, snarled at the news. A sniper's ghosting the game, he said. Find the nest. Use the Falcon drones. Vextrians prided themselves on predator precision. They released 3 high-speed aerial drones, capable of scanning and marking optical distortions at max speed. The drones fanned out across the canyon. The hunt had begun. Gage didn't flinch. He had calculated this reaction. He had drawn this tactic out like a fisherman setting bait. The first drone passed within 80 meters of his position. Too close for comfort, too far for suspicion. The second came lower, mapping heat currents from the rocks. Still, he didn't fire. He shifted the scope, followed the third drone, and waited for it to ping a false heat pocket planted in the western cliffs. It did. And the Vextrians took the bait. Gage pulled the trigger. The drone exploded mid-curve, its wreckage spiraling into the ridge face. The sound echoed. The Vextrians scattered, assuming the shot came from the opposite hill. They were wrong. As planned. Down below, the Morix team, a genetically modified species with tri-limbed torsos and rapid-fire cortex targeting, had been observing quietly. They didn't care about theatrics. They moved through probability. Their leader, a massive black-armored brute named Vina, ran battle sims in real time. He recalculated threat estimates and, for the first time since the games began, marked the human as Tier 0, kill on sight. No other species had ever received that rating. Not even the hive-born assassins. But Vina was not overconfident. He activated his species' neural link and connected every Morix eye to the same shared vision. It didn't help. 40 minutes later, 2 of his unit were found offline, their neural links fried. One had taken a shot through the helmet visor. The other through a solid inch of reinforced armor. Vina paused the sim. The model showed a hit probability of less than 4% at that range. And yet it had happened. Twice. The other teams grew cautious. Their laughter turned into silence. Tactical alerts were raised. Drones deployed. Noise dampeners activated. Still, the human moved undetected. Counselor Quorn sat back in his seat, now visibly agitated. Issue a warning, he barked. Accuse the Earth team of using cloaking technology. The tech aide stared down at his tablet, unsure how to explain that Earth hadn't submitted any tech request forms. They had only submitted a man. One man. Amora Vale watched all this unfold from her diplomatic station. She sipped tea and kept her face unreadable. But inside, she was smiling. She knew Gage hadn't brought a cloaking device. He didn't need one. He was the cloaking device. Years of jungle war, mountain ambushes, snowblind missions, and classified cleanups had trained him into a walking myth. Officially, he was retired. Unofficially, he had never stopped. She remembered asking him once how he kept steady after so many kills. He simply said, "Because I wait longer than the fear can speak." In the canyon below, a fresh team of Jelvar scouts approached the cliffside. They carried tech designed to measure ion disturbances left by plasma rifles. One of them carried an anti-sniper disruptor drone, built to scramble scopes with resonance bursts. Gage noted the gear, adjusted 2 notches on his scope, and switched ammunition to subsonic shock rounds. He waited until they reached a specific boulder. One scout stepped behind it, thinking he had cover. He never heard the shot. The round passed through the thin stone edge and hit him behind the eye. Another scout saw his partner fall and triggered the drone's burst signal. Gage let it launch, timed the burst wave, then fired a ricochet shot off a metal support beam embedded in the ridge. The shot bent through the burst and hit the drone midair. The feedback loop knocked out the rest of their equipment. The remaining scouts retreated in panic. By nightfall, 7 confirmed kills had been registered. All from a species that didn't send a team. Just a man. Just one name. No logos. No war chant. No camera. Just a legend drawing a circle around every laughing voice in the galaxy. And still, he hadn't moved. Not even once. By the 3rd day, the war games no longer felt like a competition. They felt like a manhunt. Every surviving team shifted from offensive assault patterns to full-on survival tactics. The original objective, to secure territory nodes and eliminate rival teams, was all but abandoned. Now, the priority was singular. Find the ghost. Kill the human. Stop the legend before it unraveled the reputation of every elite species on the board. But the more they searched, the more they failed. What began as confident pursuit turned into whispered paranoia. It was no longer about drones or heat signatures. It became something else. Something older. Something more primal. Because deep down, beneath every layer of technology and augmentation, every soldier understood the one truth that had started to haunt them. They weren't hunting him. He was hunting them. In the council's upper chamber, Quorn refused to blink at the updated casualty list. 17 confirmed losses. 4 from the Lurkans, 5 from the Vextrians, 6 from the Moriks, and 2 from his own Jelvar ranks. Every kill came without pattern. Every shot was different. Angle, distance, caliber. Some through rock. Some silent. Some so loud they echoed into the upper atmosphere. There was no consistency to pin down. That was the genius of it. Quorn's pride had become a public liability. Galactic forums were ablaze with questions. Who is the human? What tech is Earth hiding? How did a species known for falling off ladders suddenly become the most feared name on Veltraxis 9? One meme circulating across the core planets read, "Earth doesn't send warriors. It sends reminders." Meanwhile, the Morik strategist Vina was done waiting. He rerouted his squad's neural algorithm to mimic Earth ballistics. He ordered the last 2 survivors of his unit to fire blindly into suspected sniper zones. With suppressing fire echoing across the ridges, they launched decoy mines, EMP pulses, and artificial seismic tremors designed to flush out any hidden sniper. The air shook. Rocks exploded. Entire portions of the ridgeline collapsed under the artificial tremors. And for a moment, they thought it had worked. A faint flicker appeared on thermal vision. A man-sized heat source on the eastern cliff. They moved fast. 2 squads converged from separate vectors. 10 soldiers closed in with plasma nets ready. One even shouted out loud, voice trembling with excitement. They caught him. They didn't. What they found was a heated rock decoy, wrapped in the tattered remains of a thermal blanket and timed with a flare-wrapped hot canister. It had mimicked a human outline long enough to trigger their approach. As the soldiers stood there stunned, 3 of them dropped where they stood, rifles clattering to the ice. A 4th screamed and ran for cover, only to trip a tripwire that launched a chemical marker visible from orbit. The 5th simply disappeared. No sound. No body. Just a trail of blood ending in the snow like a sentence left unfinished. In the chamber above, the audience gasped. Their broadcast had gone from sport to something close to horror. And yet, the viewership didn't drop. It surged. Galactic war games had never gone viral before. But this year was different. This year had a ghost. Down in the canyon, the Vextrian leader Kesh made a final decision. Pride was gone. Strategy was broken. He activated a full orbital uplink request to his home command. He asked for an emergency deployment of an AI-controlled orbital scan weapon. Technically, it was a violation of the rules. But rules had become irrelevant. The council hesitated to approve. But under pressure and rising panic, they gave reluctant authorization for a single burst strike. 1 shot only. Coordinates locked. Target grid confirmed. The weapon charged. Countdown initiated. Gage had already moved. He had known this was coming. Not because he had surveillance, but because his instincts were older than their tech. He knew the difference between desperation and aggression. And desperation always pushed the big red button. While the scan weapon hovered over the decoy coordinates he had left behind, he had already scaled the northern cliffs, using a buried crampon line and sheer patience. He reached a natural sniper perch, a jagged, overhanging edge that overlooked the entire battlefield with a perfect angle to the council's view station. It was here that he unpacked the old rifle, recalibrated for wind, and sipped the last of his coffee from a battered steel mug. The orbital weapon fired. It vaporized a 200-meter radius of empty rock and ice. The explosion turned the ridgeline into a crater. Flames licked upward into the thin air, a false sense of victory spreading among the remaining troops. They thought the ghost had been erased. They cheered. One HFY soldier even danced on the edge of the impact zone. Then the shot came. From across the map. A single round. Fired from a height of over 1,000 meters, adjusted for wind drift, gravitational slant, and atmospheric bounce. It struck the dancing HFY through his celebration badge, cracked his exosuit, and dropped him dead before his foot touched down from his last skip. The cheering stopped. The council feed cut to static for a full 5 seconds before returning. No one spoke. No one celebrated again. Vina, still alive and now visibly trembling, sat in a hollowed crevice reviewing all his failed battle sims. Each scenario, even with his predictive neural mesh, resulted in defeat. And always from the same constant. The human did not move like a creature of war. He moved like inevitability. By the time the sun dipped below the jagged skyline of Veltraxis 9, the battlefield had changed shape. No more strategies. No more squads. Just whispers. Just shadows ducking behind cover, hoping not to be next. And above it all, silent and unmoving, Gage watched. He logged each motion in his mind. He noted not just where they were, but how they breathed. How they moved when they thought they were safe. He had once told a younger recruit, the best kill isn't when you shoot fast. It's when you shoot last. Back in orbit, Amora Vale leaned toward the communication terminal. A council observer finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Why send one man? She didn't blink. Because we don't do this to prove something to you. We do it to remind ourselves who we are. He's not here to win. He's here to end the conversation. And somewhere down in the ice and silence, Gage opened his notebook and circled a word he had written long before the mission began. The word was balance. Because to him, this wasn't war. It was correction. One shot at a time. By the 4th day, the planet itself seemed quieter. The war games had turned into something unspoken. No more team banter across open comms. No more bragging uploads to the Galactic feeds. No more confident marches into contested zones. Instead, there were hushed whispers between teammates, eyes flicking constantly toward the cliffs and shadows, rifles shaking ever so slightly in armored hands. They called him a ghost, but that wasn't the right word anymore. Ghosts didn't wait. Ghosts didn't hunt. What was watching them now was something else, something colder than the ice under their feet and more patient than time. It didn't want trophies. It didn't want surrender. It wanted silence. And silence was exactly what they gave. Vina and Kesh, now the last remaining leaders from their original squads, made contact through an encrypted channel. These two had never spoken directly. They came from rival species, from competing military doctrines, from different corners of the galaxy. But the fear in both of them erased all pride. They didn't exchange greetings. They simply traded coordinates, intel, and the same grim idea. A trap. One last attempt. A concentrated bait operation centered around the abandoned dropship field near the southern basin. It was the most open area on the map, exposed from all angles. They would stage a fake extraction, power up an inactive shuttle, and simulate a retreat signal. The human, they assumed, would try to stop it. All drones would be rerouted to that zone. Every surviving member would converge and unleash a sustained barrage at the moment he fired. That was the plan. But plans work both ways. Gage had already passed through the shuttle field the night before. He had marked its wind vectors, noted the placement of the crates, measured the slope of the terrain, and mapped every reflective surface within a mile. He had even left a small metal plate wedged at an angle beneath a fallen rail beam. It would be useful later. Then he had moved on, scaling the far northern ridge where no one expected a human to survive the wind shear. But he wasn't guessing anymore. He was sculpting the battlefield now. Every death so far had been a strike of the chisel. Every missed guess by his enemies another crack in the stone. And now the statue was nearly complete. As the trap was set, the council chamber watched with cautious hope. Kwon leaned forward for the first time since day one, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on his armrest. The other councillors whispered among themselves. Some dared to smile. Finally, a coordinated response. The surviving players had unified. The human had to make a choice. Fire and reveal his position, or let them escape and forfeit dominance. One would break the myth. The countdown began. The shuttle engines ignited, roaring with staged noise, and the field lit up with motion as armored warriors sprinted toward the platform. Drones circled overhead in tight patterns. Sentries locked into place. Everyone waited. No shot came. Seconds passed. Then a minute. The shuttle doors stayed open. No bullet. No body. No sign. And then something small, something strange happened. The far sensor tower, a relic left behind on the first day of the games, emitted a high-pitched ping. It wasn't loud. It wasn't part of the plan. It simply let out a single tone, just enough to make every soldier pause and look. And in that second, when their heads turned and their muscles tensed, the beam from beneath the crates caught the sun. Just a sliver. Just enough to bounce a reflection across the helmets of the front row. It was all Gage needed. The shot didn't come from above. It came from below. Ricocheted off the beam he planted the night before. It traveled between the crates, bounced once, skipped off the reflective plate under the rail beam, and struck the shuttle's primary thruster core. The explosion was instant. A controlled detonation, not powerful enough to kill everyone, but enough to create chaos, heat, smoke, and confusion. In the blur that followed, 3 more shots echoed, each timed between panic movements, each finding a target before the sound of the last one faded. Counselor Quorn stood from his seat. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't sit any longer. His mouth was dry. His aides said nothing. The other counselors watched the screen like children witnessing something too big to explain. In the smoke, in the fire, the last coordinated effort dissolved. The trap had been turned inside out. It wasn't a moment of victory. It was humiliation disguised as warfare. The field became a graveyard of sparks and melted snow. And through it all, not one frame of footage caught the sniper. Amora Vale sat with her hands folded. She didn't react. She didn't even blink. Someone whispered behind her that this wasn't war, it was theater. But they were wrong. This wasn't a performance. It was a lesson. The kind written in the bones of those who thought they could define power with committee votes and diplomatic titles. The council had mistaken silence for weakness. Again. In the aftermath of the ambush reversal, the remaining soldiers scattered. Kesh limped into a ravine, wounded but alive, muttering Vextrian curses and pulling fragments from his side. Vina vanished completely. Some speculated he ran for the edge of the map and deactivated his comms. Others believed he tried to tunnel underground using old mining vents. Either way, he never reappeared. The game systems marked his biosignature as static. Whether he was hiding or dead, no one could say. Up on the cliffs, Gage watched the fire burn low. He didn't celebrate. He didn't move. He simply tore a page from his notebook and let it drift into the wind. The page had no words. Just a sketch of the shuttle field, drawn days ago, with 3XS marked exactly where they had fallen. He folded the remaining pages and tucked them back into his coat. He scanned the horizon one last time, not for threats, but for something far more important. Quiet. He listened. There were no more footsteps. No more calls over comms. Just wind. The council, unsure of what to do next, paused the games temporarily. They issued no statement. No replay feed. No highlight reel. They had nothing left to say. And the galaxy, for the first time in a generation, watched Earth not as a joke, not as a backwater world, but as something new. Something old. Something that waited in the shadows and spoke in the language of rifles and restraint. The kind of force you didn't provoke. The kind that didn't bark orders or flaunt medals. The kind that said nothing. Because when the human finally fires, the conversation is already over. ChatGPT said. By the 5th day, there were no more teams left to challenge him. No coordinated formations, no elite scouts tracking his position, no cocky voices on open comms trying to bait him with arrogance. The battlefield was still alive, but only barely. Pockets of survivors hid deep inside cave systems or abandoned wreckage, avoiding open ground, too afraid to even risk a step into the sniper's line of sight. They didn't need to see him anymore. His presence had become a force of nature, like wind or cold or gravity. Something they knew was there even if they couldn't see it, something they understood could strike at any time and from anywhere. The games had ended without ending. The scoreboard no longer mattered. The rules had dissolved under fear. But up in the council chamber, no one could say it out loud. Kwon stood in silence, his clawed hands trembling slightly behind his back. The humiliation was complete, but he still had one last option, one buried deep in the rule charter. A clause written for extreme situations, never used before. It allowed a council judge to issue a final challenge to any participant, a single-shot attempt on the judge's beacon itself. A nearly impossible feat, protected by distance, elevation, and layers of reinforced energy shielding. The challenge was ceremonial. No one had ever attempted it. No one had ever come close. But now, with the entire galaxy watching and his own name being dragged across news feeds and memes, Kwon saw no other path left to restore his pride. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and activated the central broadcast node. His voice echoed not just across the arena but through every live feed tuned into the war games from every world in the Council's reach. He issued the challenge in the ancient language of High Command. A direct strike on the judge's beacon, from a minimum distance of 2,000 meters, through fluctuating weather, high winds, and reinforced alloy shielding. One bullet. One chance. Hit or fail. If the human succeeded, the tournament would end immediately. If he missed, he would be declared a forfeit and removed from the competition by orbital override. The statement was met with hushed disbelief, then a ripple of excitement across the galaxy. For the first time, even the neutral species tuned in. This wasn't a game anymore. This was history. Somewhere far below, nestled beneath a jagged overhang laid in frost and silent stone, Lance Gage opened his eyes. He had heard the broadcast through his silent feed receiver. He didn't react. Didn't shift his body. He simply reached beside him, unwrapped the old bolt-action rifle, and unfolded a small section of notebook paper. On it was a hand-drawn diagram of the Council's platform, including wind corridors, tower height, and estimated shield resonance patterns. He had prepared for this. Not because he expected the challenge, but because he knew that eventually, pride always tried to stand back up after it was flattened. He adjusted his scope slowly, his breathing calm and steady. The air was thin, the wind sharp, slicing between the cliff edges like a blade. He reached into his coat and removed a small container. Inside was a single handcrafted round, polished and checked 100 times. No tracer, no tech. Just weight, speed, and perfect balance. The kind of bullet that didn't care about politics or honor. It only cared about the line it followed. In the council chamber, the beacon was activated. A glowing target lit up above the judge's seat, encased in an energy dome pulsing with static fields. Kwon looked up at it once, then sat down with a forced calm. He thought the distance was enough. He thought the dome would hold. But mostly, he thought no one from Earth could do what no other species had ever done. He thought wrong. The moment passed slowly, as if time itself knew it was about to be cut in half. Across every screen in the galaxy, trillions watched in silence. And then it came. The sound didn't reach the council platform. The bullet was faster. It cracked through the sky like a judgment passed by a god no one believed in until now. It bent with the wind, curved slightly to compensate for planetary spin, and struck the energy beacon dead center. Not off by an inch. Not cracked or deflected. It passed through the shield as if the shield wasn't there. A second later, the beacon shorted out, sparked, and fell to the floor in pieces. No one moved. No one cheered. In that moment, there was only the sound of static as the cameras scrambled to recenter. The impossible had happened. And it had happened so precisely, so calmly, that it didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like an answer. A final, unspoken message from a planet the galaxy had once called Clumsy. They had mocked the slips, the stumbles, the misfires and the bloopers. They had laughed at Earth's awkward beginnings, its crude tools, and its chaotic culture. But they had never understood its patience. Its quiet. Its ghosts. Quorn stood slowly, eyes wide, mouth tight, not from fear but from the full-body impact of disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but Amora Vale stood before him first. She hadn't moved from her seat until now. She walked to the center of the platform, stepped over the broken beacon, and calmly placed a sealed envelope on the judge's podium. Then she looked up at the cameras and spoke in a voice that was heard across 1,000 systems. The next time you think we're the ones who stumble, remember who was standing still while the rest of you ran in circles. She walked off the platform without waiting for permission. Down on Veltraxis 9, Lance Gage packed up his gear. He wiped down the rifle, folded his notebook, and scattered a few pebbles over the imprint his body had left in the snow. Then he stood, finally, for the first time in days. The wind rushed past him like applause that no one could hear. He looked once at the sky, then disappeared down the backside of the ridge, leaving nothing behind but silence. There were no medals given. No speeches. No closing ceremony. The council quietly declared Earth the victor and scrubbed the records of how many were eliminated. They did not want to answer questions about the one-man team. They did not want to acknowledge that the galaxy's most advanced species had been undone by a single marksman with a bolt-action rifle and a paperback notebook. But the galaxy remembered anyway. Not the name. Not the file number. Just the shot. And the fact that for 5 days, the entire known universe was terrified of a species they once called Clumsy. Earth didn't just win. It rewrote the meaning of precision.